Welcome to Read and Write MMA Catharsis podcast. If you didn't know, this is the most important MMA podcast in North America. My name is Seth Wright.
And I am Nick Reed.
My co-host Nick Reed. We both live in Utah. This is where we live, we train. This is where we raise our families. And we find a little bit of catharsis from our day-to-day by watching mixed martial arts. And today we wanted to start by introducing ourselves just a wee bit more. And I thought that one way we could do that is by sharing what fight actually brought MMA to our life. Nick, can you recall when did mixed martial arts become an emotional release or cathartic experience for you?
So basically, I can't remember the exact fight, but it was I want to say it was a little under a decade ago. I was newly married. I don't think we had any kids. My wife's, one of her old college roommates invited us over she was dating this guy who is now her husband, invited us over to watch, I think it was a UFC fight. And, they were really into it. At that point, I had been exposed to the negative perspective of mixed martial arts. At the time, they just called it ultimate fighting. They didn't call it mixed martial arts. And, a lot of people said it was human cockfighting, that it was just brutal, that there were no holds barred, it was unsanctioned, unruly. And so I didn't necessarily have that negative perspective, but that's what I was exposed to.
Who was fighting?
I can't remember. It was all a blur to me.
Huh.
I want to spit out that there were big names, but I don't want to be incorrect. I don't want to be inaccurate.
But
at that point, the people who I was watching, or the people with whom I was watching, who or whom, it doesn't matter. They explained to me that it was more than just like each other, than two guys punching the crap out of each other. And so they started explaining technique when they were doing things like chokes and defensive postures, etc. And I gained a newfound respect for those fighters. How about you, Seth?
Oh man, I know. I actually know the fight. It was Frank Shamrock, Tito, number 3. It was on Spike TV. And I had never really paid attention to mixed martial arts. And I was at a point in time in my life where I was transitioning some things. I left my job, so I was unemployed. I was going back to school. I was kind of reorganizing some things in my life. And it just blew my mind, man. I saw these two guys who were competing against each other. Well, in retrospect, it wasn't much of a competition because of who was fighting. Tito handily won again for the third time. But it just made me think, that I'm not made of glass. Like I could go through things in my life, like transitioning, from one job to another, one career to another. I could go back to school. I could leave my job. I'm not made of glass. Like I'm not going to break if I get hit. And I really got hooked on that concept and on everything that goes into it. And I really like the stories of the people. So now we shared.
Hold on. So you decided to be Bruce Willis instead of Samuel L. Jackson, is what you're saying?
Well, that's the thing. I can make the argument that Mr. Glass actually kept getting up after getting broken. Because if you remember his backstory, that was part of it. Like he would constantly get broken until he got to the point where he just decided to start breaking other things.
So in other words, MMA was your comic book.
A lot of people, comic book kind of seems like the cathartic avenue du jour right now.
Right.
Yeah, maybe it was in a way. Maybe these guys were like my superheroes.
Using MMA as their comic book.
Yeah, why not, man?
To be unbreakable.
To be unbreakable, or maybe to let yourself know that you can be broken.
Excellent, and then you can put yourself back together like Humpty Dumpty.
That's right.
Too many references to people breaking apart.
Lots of nursery rhyme references, but we're parents, and that's what happens when you're a parent.
That's right.
You start to quote nursery rhymes and sing the theme song to Little Einsteins at the worst possible moments of the day. Now, if you like the podcast, and we know you do because this is the most important mixed martial arts podcast in North America.
North America so far.
You can find us. We have a YouTube page, which you can find a link right here on this YouTube video. We've got a web page, and we have a Facebook page.
Right, so the YouTube page is Read and Write MMA Catharsis. Just look it up. And then our Facebook page is www.facebook.com/Read and Write MMA Catharsis. And then we're going to embed the audio. We're going to try and get it on iTunes. And then we're going to embed the audio into the website. And what's the website, Seth?
MMAFanunion.com. Just go there.
MMAFanunion.com.
That's a landing spot. That's one of many landing spots. Get social with us. Talk with us. Come and be part of what we're building right now. So, Nick, right now we're both on the podcast. It's our second podcast. And we're going to do a fact check.
Correct. Just a quick one.
A quick one from last week. Last week we talked a little bit about the Dublin card, and we compared the Conor McGregor win over Dustin Poirier to what could possibly happen with Joe Duffy and Dustin Poirier.
Correct. So what Seth and I stated incorrectly was that Conor McGregor beat Dustin Poirier in under 3 minutes. Though that is factually correct, it is inaccurate. To be more precise, Conor McGregor beat Dustin Poirier in under 2 minutes, in a minute 46.
Yes.
But an interesting factoid that we ignored was how fast Joe Duffy beat Conor McGregor. Joe Duffy beat Conor McGregor in 38 seconds. 38 seconds. So, we're going to introduce a segment soon, and I'm going to introduce it by this. Greater than, less than, equal to. Conor McGregor, greater than Dustin Poirier. Joe Duffy, greater than Dustin Poirier. Joe Duffy, greater than Conor McGregor, i.e. Joe Duffy, it's Joe Duffy's island. Ireland belongs to Joe Duffy. It doesn't belong to Conor McGregor. No matter how much he talks, no matter how big his mouth is, Joe Duffy is the king of Ireland. That is a fact today, and it's a fact in the future. Go ahead.
You know, it's important. Let's chase that with on MMAfighting.com. I think it was on the MMA Hour. Just a fantastic website, by the way, MMAfighting.com. Joe Duffy was interviewed by Ariel Helwani, and he said that he will absolutely beat Conor McGregor quickly. Maybe even faster than the first time.
Correct. Faster than 38 seconds, which is Ronda Rousey pace.
Yeah. I don't believe that for a heartbeat. However, I don't mind. I don't mind that he said it. I mean,
definitely.
He's not going to be the promoter of fights that Conor McGregor is. No. But at least he can display a little bit of confidence. Like, participate. Participate, Duffy, a little bit in the process.
Correct. So let's move this segment into your personal segment, greater than, less than, equal to. Can you explain it first, and then go into your segment of today?
I think you modeled it really well. Really what we're going to do is we're going to take fighters, we're going to take results, we're going to take the context around them in their careers, and we're going to compare them to one another. And kind of give our take on X fighter versus Y fighter, and just share it with people. I'll give an example. Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz, GSP. These are all guys that we are constantly talking about because they're iconic, because of the fights they've had, because of who they faced off against, because of their attitudes, the way they've been promoted. Anderson Silva moved up from middleweight to light heavyweight, and he demolished his competition. He was able to dominate every single person in front of him. It didn't matter the weight class, and he just kept on building this mystique, this legacy. I mean, he was just dangerous, period. There's no doubt about it. Nick Diaz went up in weight to fight Anderson Silva at UFC 183. An awesome fight. Like this, it's the closest thing to dramaturgy that we'll get within the octagon. Nick Diaz was playing his role, man. He was laying down, lounging on the canvas, goading Anderson Silva. And a lot of MMA journalists and fans, they threw a lot of shade Nick Diaz's way. They just thought there's no way he's going to win this fight. If Anderson Silva, who's knocking out light heavyweights, fights a guy who spent the bulk of his career fighting at welterweight, isn't the end of the match a foregone conclusion at that point? Forrest Griffin fought Silva at UFC 101 and got knocked out in the first round. Stephan Bonner was yoked out to his gills, and he got demolished at the end of the first round of his fight against Anderson Silva at UFC 153. Vitor Belfort ate a front kick to the face, got knocked out in round 1 by Anderson Silva at UFC 126. Vitor held a belt. I mean, he's a fantastic fighter, has a fantastic legacy, even if it's marred by PEDs like Anderson's is at this point.
And haircuts.
GSP would say, I can't fight Anderson. We can't find a weight class that I think would make it a competitive fight for the both of us. Now back to Nick Diaz. He not only moves up to middleweight, he competes with Silva for 5 rounds. He clowns the GOAT. And I think he made his case for being one of the greatest MMA fighters ever. So, to wit, Nick Diaz is greater than Vitor Belfort. Nick Diaz is greater than Forrest Griffin. Nick Diaz is greater than Stephan Bonner. And Nick Diaz is greater than GSP because he stepped up to the plate. So that's greater than, less than, equal to. Now, last week we talked about making a list of 10 dudes in MMA that people want to see get knocked out. Like it's a knockout that could actually move the sport forward.
Let's go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. How about that?
Okay, you want to go backwards? All right. All right, I'll follow the list.
If that's all right with you.
Okay, so the one that I thought...
Chirp in when you want.
The one I thought was the best was your number 10, and that's Fyodor Emelianenko.
Yeah, so Fyodor Emelianenko, he's got the mystique. I don't think of anybody in the world, even though he lost to Bigfoot Silva. Did he lose to Verdum? He lost to Verdum.
And Dan Henderson.
So he lost basically once he got into Strikeforce, he just lost. But still, people call him the last emperor. I mean, they may even just refer to him as the emperor. And I think people, at least in the North American MMA populace, let's just say that, they want to see Fedor just broken down and become a human. And so I think Fyodor Emelianenko is one of those people who's a candidate for people who just want to see him get knocked out. They don't want to see him disappear. They just want to see him brought down to earth.
I agree, and you said it perfectly. I think that we can build on that with the next person you have on the list, who is Johnny Hendricks.
If you observe his last few fights and the fact that he missed weight with Tyron Woodley, I don't think he has it physically. And I won't even question his mental capacity to fight. I just don't think that he has the drive as much anymore. He's tasted quite a bit of success, a little bit of fame. And I think for Johnny Hendricks, that's enough fame for him. And I think that's enough of the pinnacle and spotlight for him that when it comes down to it, I think he just wants to fight. And that frustrates people. It frustrates people because they want to see every fighter give their all and become a champion. I don't think Johnny Hendricks wants to be a champion anymore. And so for that fact, I think people want to see him get knocked out because they're upset.
For me, it's the sour grapes. Like when he lost to GSP, he said he was only going at 70%. If he has a loss, even when he lost to the current champ, to Robbie Lawler, the sour grapes just were ever present, Mm-hmm. Like when he was complaining about Carlos Condit getting the next title shot. I think that when someone has sour grapes like that, and they like to dispute the outcome of a contest, you really want them to lose in a decisive fashion where they just can't argue it anymore.
Right, and we talked about GSP Hendricks last week, and that we knew that every day of every week, Hendricks is going to lose a GSP because of the format of the fight. And I think if you paid attention to the lead-up to that fight, Johnny Hendricks kept complaining about who the governing body of testing was. What, it's VADA, USADA? And
WADA?
He just made him, WADA. That's what it kept, whatever he was saying. I can't remember if he was, I know it's WADA, but I think he was saying VADA. I can't remember exactly. But again, it's more sour grapes. Now, number 8, I think you and I disagree, but I'm going to go forward with it and give my explanation. Dominic Cruz. I think Dominic Cruz is a polarizing individual, and I think we're on both ends of the pole. I think that I think he's kind of a debutante, dilettante. I think he acts like a brat a lot. That doesn't discount his knowledge of mixed martial arts. Just his attitude is such where people want to smack him in the face. You know, he's a handsome dude, so people like seeing handsome dudes get punched in the face. And I think his style is awkward. If you're a purist of mixed martial arts, you'll enjoy his style. But if you're a newcomer to the mixed martial arts world, you just see him as a little spazoid bouncing around the ring, kicking and punching from awkward angles. Now, you and I can appreciate his technique, the way that he's evasive, and he's got power behind his punches. Like, that is no doubt. He can knock people out. But I think with his movement, it's just, he basically just beats people down without knocking them out. And so I think a lot of people with that polarizing personality and fighting style just want to see him, like, dance around the ring and then get popped in the face and fall over.
See, I think
he's number 8.
He's got this legacy. I think the sport benefits from him continuing to dominate. Like, a lot of people when they fight, like BJ Penn, you know, he's jumped around weight classes. He's had an incredible amount of success. But if you were to make a chart of his success, it's almost like dots, you know, like there's a high dot, a low dot, a high dot, a low dot. With Dominic Cruz, you connect the dots into a straight line, and it's constantly going up. He might be the greatest 135-pounder ever, and I think I would love to see him fight and compete more, but he's been injured for many, many moons at this point.
Right.
But I would love to see him go out completely unbeaten, like unblemished, except for that one loss. But
who did he lose to?
Your friend Uriah.
The California kid, man.
Uriah Faber, man. Say hi to him for me. Okay, so number 7 is Roy Nelson.
I don't think you and I have to belabor the point because we have our opinions on Roy Nelson, and I think it echoes the opinions of most people who are fans of MMA. He should be at 205.
Yes.
He should be at 205, and I think he would be the champion at 205. He's got top-level jiu-jitsu. He's got a chin that won't quit, and he can knock everybody out. Simple. I think it's a simple equation of discipline plus existing technique and experience equals light heavyweight champion. People just want to see him knocked out. They're tired of his lackadaisical nature towards MMA.
Well, I love number 6 on the list, and that's Jose Aldo. Now, I haven't talked about this, but Nick Reed has lived in Brazil. He's lived amongst the Brazilian people. He's fluent in Portuguese. Jose Aldo, icon in the sport.
Pound for pound, number 1.
Pound for pound, number 1 by the UFC. How does Jose getting knocked out move the sport forward?
Him getting knocked out is, for the most part, it has to do with number 4 on the list, Conor McGregor. We won't skip number 5. But number 6, with Jose Aldo, you know, they see the excuses. People, you know, hear the kind of spotty nature of testing, blood testing, urine testing. They see him pull out of fights constantly. There's a negative mark on Novo União, and he's the face of Novo União. And when you have such negativity surrounding you, and the thing is, I don't begrudge Jose Aldo as a person or necessarily as a fighter. I just think most people see the cloud around him, the gym, and the people he associates with, and they kind of want to see that knocked out. So he not only represents Jose Aldo, he represents all of those things. And people kind of see that as a good versus evil. And even though you're good as Conor McGregor, which is very funny, They want to just see Conor McGregor knock him out. But not so much that he's hated. They just want to see him knocked out. And to them, because it's not enough for Renan Barão to get dominated by TJ Dillashaw. Jose Aldo is number 1. He's the best. He's Novo União. He's all of that. People want to see him knocked out.
I think that Jose Aldo getting knocked out or Conor McGregor getting knocked out, I think it would kind of serve the same purpose as GSP getting knocked out by Matt Serra. Because the flip side is it could give us a comeback story. Like, we love comeback stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, are people going to cheer John Jones when he comes back? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just how it is. We love a comeback story all over the world. It's not just an American thing. We like it when someone gets knocked down and then they get back up again. That might be another way this sport can be serviced by Jose or Conor getting knocked out. It gives them a chance to create a new storyline, that of redemption and of making a comeback. So number 5, you have Vitor Belfort, and let me guess, he also represents things that people want to see get knocked out.
And one of those things he represents is Vitor Belfort. I think people have seen enough of Vitor Belfort, and this is one of those sad realities. I think people want Vitor Belfort to disappear, and I think that's unfortunate because he's an icon of the sport. I'm not one of those people. I'd like to see him keep fighting. I'd like to see him shed pounds. I think he can fight 170. 170, I think he'd be a legitimate contender at 170. You know, get off the juice, get off the mass, and he can do it. I don't think we need to belabor the Conor McGregor one. Everybody knows. You already explained it. Let's go to number 3, John Jones. So the next 3 people on the list are basically public enemies number 1, 2, and 3. Number 3 is John Jones. People think he's arrogant. He is a criminal several times over. He enters into some sort of rehabilitation program and apparently, like from his appearances, doesn't come out any better or rehabilitated. His most recent issue with the law was, which still baffles me that anybody could be a fan of him after it, is he hit a pregnant lady in a car, got up, started to flee the scene. That's it, and it gets worse, guys. He comes back to the car to retrieve something. We found out later that it's money, and takes off and runs away. So, without any remorse, immediate remorse, he just wants to hide and tuck tail. So publicly, he's a chicken, and he's a coward. So I think John Jones is public enemy number 3, and because of that, they want to see him knocked out. But they also want to see John Jones knocked out because he's unbreakable. He's absolutely unbreakable. He's unbroken as a champion. He's unbroken as a fighter. But he's a very broken individual. And for some people, they want to see him further broken.
Okay, number 2, Josimar. Am I saying that right?
It's Josimar Palhares.
Josimar Palhares. Commonly, you know, when people write about him or talk about him, they commonly refer to him as a dirty fighter.
Correct.
He's a fantastic jiu-jitsu artist, Brazilian jiu-jitsu artist, and in competition, he will get a submission, usually a knee bar, and he will hold it past the tap. So the fighter will tap out. The referee will say, that's enough, touch the fighter so they know that the fight is over, and he will hold on and torque that submission just a little bit longer to the point where he's actually damaged fighters.
I guess you could say I'm coming to the defense a little bit with Josimar Palhares. You know, the fighters want to see him knocked out. Everybody wants to see him knocked out. They definitely want to see him disappear. People do not want him in the sport of MMA anymore. I mean, too many strikes. I'm going to refer to a soccer player named Luis Suarez. Do you know who Luis Suarez is?
For sure. He's a Uruguayan, and he's a biter.
Bites people. Yeah. He bites people. Now, there's some good articles about Luis Suarez, and I recommend people read about them. And I think it's something similar to Josimar Palhares. Luis Suarez, his biting is a reaction that his world is going to crumble. You know, it's some sort of defense mechanism that he's gotten help with. Now, that's something that I think people need to recognize. Luis Suarez, he's getting help because biting is a no-no. He's come up from a rough situation, and I'm not an apologist necessarily. I'm just explaining. He comes from a rough situation. He's very grateful for what he has. He has a beautiful wife, beautiful family, everything. But one of those things mentally is he feels that it can all come falling and crushing and falling apart. And I think that's one of the things about Josimar Palhares is that for some reason, when he gets that knee bar locked in, it becomes personal. And that personal thing is, I think he fears retaliation. So he wants to make sure that the person who he is fighting doesn't retaliate. And the way that he can do that is disabling disabling them or putting an exclamation point on the end of it. That's not right, but I think that's what he's doing.
Man, I love that.
It's fear that drives him.
That fight when he got submitted by Belcher was fantastic. Mm-hmm. It was so satisfying to see a guy who, I mean, I know that you're talking about social determinants. I mean, a guy who's a bully, and he's a professional. Regardless of your background, you're a professional, and you're competing against other professionals, and you can take away their professional livelihood with this, whatever it is, whatever the reason is. I think that ultimately, rather than intent, we have to look at outcome. And if the outcome shines a light on the intent, and the intent is, well, I feel like I'm going to lose everything, and, et cetera, and how I was raised, it's not enough for me anymore. You're a professional. You're in some of the top mixed martial arts organizations in the world, and you need to be knocked out. Someone needs to go in there and knock you out.
And I think that's why I think that the Luis Suarez comparison is good, because Luis Suarez recognizes he also has good people around him as well. So that could be another part of the situation, is that Luis Suarez, he's surrounded by really good people who care about him, who want him to succeed, and they're nipping the problem in the bud. It's happened several times, but it's not as egregious. And biting an ear is not even close to ending somebody's career.
Oh, dude.
And that's what it comes down to.
I have to tell you something. I remember the first time that my oldest son bit me. He was maybe 2 or 3. I remember I said to my son, you're grounded at a future date. and I literally grounded him at a future date when he understood it. And he said, Dad, why am I grounded? And I said, son, you bit me. And he was like, when? And I was like, 10 years ago. Okay, number 1.
Bad lesson. Anyway, number 1.
War Machine.
I don't know if it's obvious to people. War Machine, a.k.a. John Koppenheimer. Seth, can you explain just as quick as possible?
He is a rapist, a very violent criminal. He has done horrible things specifically to his girlfriend. He raped her, he beat her, he held her hostage. It's not the first time that he had done that. He tried to kill her and another person, literally with his hands.
Right.
He's in jail. It's where he needs to be. It's not the first time he has been in there. I think it's another one of those cathartic things. It's like saying, man, I wish I could see Saddam Hussein get knocked out in a boxing match with who would knock out Saddam Hussein? Like George W. Bush. Oh man, I'd love to see George W. Bush.
Please edit that out.
So, it's one of those things where there's a bad person, you want to see him get knocked out. You know what?
Right.
I think as an addendum, someone who's not in mixed martial arts at all, but who should definitely get knocked out, Bill Cosby.
I want to invite people. So on the Facebook page, we're going to put a poll, or in the comment section of either the YouTube page, Facebook page. We want to hear your top 10. You could do a quick top 10 and just say, okay, this is my top 10. Or you can have a drawn-out explanation, and you might be featured on a future podcast. We invite comments. We invite questions, topics of discussion.
Nick, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to go over the main events of the next couple UFC cards. And I feel like one of the main events is not like the others. And let me see if you can point it out. So up next, Poirier-Duffy. So Poirier-Duffy, we've talked about it. It has title implications, and there are a lot of cool storylines attached to it.
Sure.
Belfort-Henderson, third fight, second fight ended kind of controversially, I guess. UFC 193, Rousey home. Everybody's interested in that fight. One of the best promos ever produced by the UFC is attached to that one. UFC Fight Night, Brown Gastelum, the immortal and Kelvin Gastelum. Awesome fight.
Potentially an awesome fight.
I think it's going to blow our minds. And then the Korea card, UFC Fight Night, Henderson, Thiago Alves. It should be a fantastic fight. I mean, it's a great card. And then we've got UFC Fight Night, Van Zandt, Calderwood.
That's kind of a letdown.
Do you know what the co-main for that is? For that card is going to be?
Sage Northcutt?
Yeah.
Sage and Paige?
Yeah.
Are they going to date?
Dude, they've literally released a marketing one sheet saying Page and Sage on it.
Yeah.
It's his second fight in the UFC. He's co-main a UFC Fight Night, December 10th in Las Vegas, and I feel like that is not like the other main cards. You know, I don't.
Yeah,
think...
it's a letdown, to be honest.
I understand the promotional aspect, but who else is on that card? You've got Jim Miller and Michael Chiesa.
Good fight.
It's going to be a fantastic fight.
Mm-hmm.
You've got, Theodoro Santos, Carlos Jr. in Casey. Carlos Jr. won the Brazilian Tough. You've got some great fights. I don't know. I feel like they're kind of pushing this guy on us a little bit too much.
Well, I don't think it's the pushing so much. I just think, because Joanne Calderwood, she's a cool girl, but her last few fights have been a letdown. Paige Van Zandt, everyone just thinks she's a face. She's winning her fights, but they just think she's a face. And so it seems like a forceful promotion of two young people, which is fine. The UFC needs to do that. But I think the cards preceding those, those main event fights are amazing. They're absolutely amazing. I mean, it's worth the pay-per-view just for those main events, I think.
And that weekend, you've got several other cards as well. My favorite probably being the Chad Mendez Frankie Edgar fight. Well, I mean, you've got Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor, of course. But in any case, for the UFC, just a question. Did you make this main and co-main because the first names of two of the fighters rhyme? Did you make it because you feel like these are two exciting fights? Or did you make it because it's good marketing and that you've struck gold, like with Conor McGregor? I want to revisit a few predictions from our last episode. We talked a lot about the Dublin Ireland card. You made a call, dude. You said that a better co-main than Stipe Miocic Ben Rothwell would be Madadi Park.
That's right.
And right after the podcast, literally the day after, the Rothwell fight was canceled, and lo and behold, they named the co-main Madadi Park.
Mm-hmm.
So well done on that. You can look into the future and tell us what happened. So I'm going to ask you, using your ESP powers, let's talk about who Stipe should fight next and who Ben Rothwell should fight next. Should they just table the fight and reschedule it?
Well, I think depends on the extent of Miocic's of his injury. If his injury is as severe as it might be a lower back, I mean, do we know what the injury is yet?
I don't know what it is, but I mean, I guess the question is, should they just reschedule that fight?
Who do we have fighting? Velasquez fighting Verdum.
Yes.
Does JDS have a fight?
Overing.
Who's he fighting next? He's fighting Alistair Overing. Miocic got hurt. Andrei Arlovsky, he is fighting... Ben Rothwell... Oh, that's the fight. I don't think we worry about Stipe Miocic. We move down to Ben Rothwell. And he revisits the fight with Andrei Arlovsky. He avenges the loss when... I think they were fighting in Pride, or maybe Affliction. I can't remember. That was a really good fight, and Arlovsky just overwhelmed him at the end. So I can say with Arlovsky and Rothwell, that's the next fight to make. Stipe Miocic depends on the extent of his fight or his injury. I don't know who he fights next.
I just feel like that's the best matchup.
Is with Rothwell?
Is with Rothwell.
And they just table it?
It makes me think of Yoel Romero and Jacare. Right? They made that fight 3 times, right? And twice it didn't happen. But that was really the matchup that was meant to be. It had to happen. It had the greatest title implications as far as who moves forward and who really contends or gets the number 1 contendership. And I kind of feel like this could be one of those fights. If possible, I'd like to see it rescheduled, sooner rather than later. I know these guys got to eat. Right. But I feel like that's the best possible fight that has title implications. But I mean, Arlovsky-Rothwell will be a fantastic competition as well.
It is. I invite people to revisit that fight.
We had talked previously on North America's most important MMA podcast that we wanted to end with a few final thoughts. So if you could cue up, Nick, maybe a thought, if you could distill or boil down those fantastic thoughts in your noggin down to just a few final ones for our viewers, for our listenership, what would they be? What do you have to say?
Listen to our podcast. Interact with us by comments, questions, etc. One of the things that people said to me who I shared the podcast with last week was they just didn't know enough about mixed martial arts. What I'm hoping is that this podcast not only, broadcasts our opinions, makes you better people, smarter, etc., that it's a relaxing part of your day, but also that it elicits curiosity for those who are fans of MMA and who aren't fans of MMA. We talked about various scenarios today about the interconnectivity of Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Joe Duffy. Look at that, explore that, tell us what you think. We talked about, I think, some thought-provoking and emotionally provocative statements in our top 10 dudes in MMA that people want to see get knocked out. Look at those. Give us your feedback. But also, Seth brought up some really good points. Critically think about the fight cards that are coming up next. Look at those main events, co-main events. And the good thing about mixed martial arts is the community is not that big, and a lot of people's voices can be heard. And Dana White, Scott Coker, the powers that be in all these fight promotions, they want to make the fights that the fans want to see. And so this could be a medium for seeing the fights that you want to see.
Find your reason. Investigate this sport, learn about it, and find your reason. Nick and I started this podcast out by sharing our reasons, how we got into podcast. It was really by chance and by a satellite signal, probably in both of our cases. But the timing was just right, and then we found kind of a greater meaning in it. So if you're looking for something, try this out. Okay, so next week, we're going to talk about what's next for the fighters on the UFC Dublin card. It's going to be kind of a post-fight analysis, and we're going to talk about, what possible matchups could lie in waiting for each one of the winning fighters and what to do with those who lose. We're going to preview the UFC Fight Night Belfort v. Henderson. We're also going to go over your suggestions for fighters who should get knocked out. And we have a lot more stuff in the pipeline. This is the Read and Write MMA Catharsis second podcast. Today's Tuesday, October 20th, 2015.
My name is Nick Reed.
My name is Seth Wright. Thank you for listening.